Joel, welcome back to Becoming Legendary. Although this is special, episode 1 of Becoming Legendary, The Invisible Path.
Patrick, it's good to be back. It's been a long time since we've done one of these.
Yeah, like a year.
Yeah.
More than a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too freaking long.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is why I begged you to do a monthly podcast.
You tricked me into it. We were in such a good flow state with our conversation, and you floated that by, and my introvert wasn't paying attention, and so you used some Jedi mind trick, and here we are.
Yes,
so, this is awesome. Yeah.
So why don't we, Becoming Legendary has been a thing for 3-ish years now. And it's kind of evolved and morphed. And this is like a brand new thing that I'm really excited about. Totally, absolutely your idea. All I said was, would you please speak to me once a month? And like you said, you got tricked into it. I don't care how it happened. It was great.
Yeah.
But this idea of the invisible path, this thing that we're going to kind of extrapolate out over the coming months. You beautifully put this together for me. So I'll let you kind of give your explanation, and I'll see if I can fill in any details. But what is the invisible path?
Well, first, let's acknowledge the sort of awesome pretentiousness of the name, right? There's something about it that's a bit of like sucking people in, but anyways, I mean, I think in some ways we've both been at this and moving a little bit against against the typical narratives that are out there that society puts forth, and doing it quietly in our own ways, and it seems like more and more, if you follow the scripts, if you follow the narratives that sort of the mainstream culture puts out there for you, sooner or later you're going to get hustled in one way or another, out of time, out of money, out of connection, out of health, out of meaning, in a way. And maybe that sounds harsh, because we are living at the peak of human civilization, and so there's a lot to be grateful for, and a lot of amazing things out there, and a lot of good resources. And so what else can I say about this right now? I guess to really thrive today, it seems to me like you've got to almost ignore some of the typical narratives out there and the stories, because they're just not working as well as they used to. And I think people listening to this, people that connect with you, I'm sure they resonate with some of that. I'm sure they've seen that in their own lives. You look at, and there's so many examples. You could look at just how, the 4-year college path, that's not working out as well for as many people these days. It works out for some people, not as well for a lot of people, though. They get trapped in the debt cycle. In fact, the largest source of income now that the United States government has is student debt. Student debt. Sorry, that was a Freudian slip. Student debt is actually the largest source of income now for the government. That's the stunning thing, and there's something about that that's wrong. Another. It's
also the only debt that
another kind of unconscious narrative. Yes. You can't.
The only debt you can't escape from, which is crazy.
Stunning. Yeah. So, and I think the point of this is we're gonna, maybe today we'll sort of touch on a bunch of these, and touch on some problems, touch on some topics that we'll speak about in the future as well, right?
Yeah.
Just quickly for me to cover a few more here, so we don't just sit on student debt. Just the idea of the deferred life plan that myself and so many people are on, right? You you're told go to school, get a job, work, save, and then retire, and then maybe you'll enjoy your life. Once you're old and too old to enjoy it, maybe your body's breaking down a little bit, maybe you've had some medical issues, and that rolls right into the next one, which is, of course, health and listening to different authority figures that know so much, and I'm no genius, right? This whole project isn't about giving advice per se. This is about us, I think, thinking out loud and working through things. But if you spend enough time in the medical system, you're gonna probably, if you're paying attention and do a little doctor Googling, you're gonna realize, oh, there's some big holes that are present here. And I would say, just to close it out right now, the invisible path has to do with taking responsibility. We're told these days that we don't have to sacrifice in a way. Like, I think back, I don't know if I ranted about this in my last appearance on your podcast or not, but we're told today that with, I'll just call it the cerveza sickness, to avoid the algorithms, we're told that we're fighting a war, and this has been compared to World War II, but we're giving everyone help, which is fine. Maybe people need financial help. Things are really difficult right now. But in World War II, we were fighting the Nazis, and the country was told to sacrifice. And people grew gardens. They had the victory gardens. There was rationing because resources were being sent off, and people back then they had to sacrifice. They had to take a real level of personal responsibility and sacrifice. And it's a diligent yoga. There's some good work to be had there by adopting that responsibility, because if you accept that it's not your fault and that someone essentially owes you something, that you're owed something, who has the power in that relationship, and what are you going to be like at the end of that? Are you going to be growing emotionally, spiritually, financially, with your family, all of that, or are you going to be waiting and giving your power over to someone else? So that was a wide-ranging bit of a rant there.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this concept of the invisible experience that we're living in, right? Which you listen to neuroscientists and you listen to people talking about our conscious versus our subconscious perception of things. And 95% of what we experience is subconscious, right? So if 95% of the experiences that our bodies are receiving are happening at a level that we're not conscious of, the depth of what the invisible path entails is pretty significant.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot for us to discover within this life experience. And I think about playing within the 5% that we're aware of, and how if you could expand that to 10%, what a different life you would have if you could experience 10% of what's going on out there.
Yeah. So thank you. I've been focusing on, in some ways, sort of the surface level or the, I don't know, the very practical stuff, but those are the stories, that's the world that we're told to focus on, of course. And there's so much more out there. I mean, we are kind of narrative driven creatures. We think that, I think we all think that we're in control, but maybe we really have a lot less control over our actions, our impulses than we think we do. I mean, there's a lot. And so having some awareness of that is certainly important. And that gets back to evolutionary biology. Certainly there's so many different spiritual practices, disciplines out there. The, yeah, the world is strange. I think it is hard. It's best not to take things at face value. That's for sure. And so I think we're going to be covering some really maybe practical, what would you call it? 3D and 4D examples, and then maybe you're going to help us bring it more to the existential realm as well, I would think.
I think I'll follow you. I think I'll follow you. I'm definitely the B side in this conversation. So, but I think that there are so many things, and I think when I think again of the invisible path, and when I think of not taking things at face value, there's a part of this that is pioneering, right? And I think that's something that you mentioned to me, is this concept of being able to pioneer. And how are you hearing me right now? Is it are you bouncing in
good?
And out?
You've slowed down a bit, but then it catches up.
Okay. That's good.
We're both in sort of out of the way places.
Yeah.
And so that's going to happen.
It is definitely rural America. Let me actually, I can't even make that happen right now. So yeah, I'm counting on, I don't know if I talked to you about this, but I've been living on 10 down, 2 or 3 up for 9 months. And I'm over on Starlink now, but every once in a while the satellites are on the other side of the world. And until Elon gets more of those things up there, sometimes it's a little rough.
Score. Okay. Technical difficulties solved. Let's see what happens here.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. So yeah, so I've been talking a little bit about narratives, and a great example of how things aren't quite what they seem would be Edward Bernays. And he was, I believe, a nephew of Sigmund Freud. And he was essentially the first peacetime or civilian peacetime directed propagandist. And what I mean by this is that you obviously have propaganda happening during wartime. You're trying to, for better or worse, propaganda sometimes can be good, right? You need to, maybe, I don't know. That's a different episode, right? Save that for a different episode. But let me just throw this example out here of what Edward Bernays did. So I don't know when this was, maybe, I don't know, 20s, 30s, I'm not sure. I'm displaying my ignorance here. But the tobacco companies, they had an issue on their hands. They had a problem. And that was that only half of the population was their target market. And that was men, because it was very taboo at the time for women to smoke. And so he needed to fix this for one of his clients. A client came to him, a tobacco company, and said, "Hey, can you help us bring in women as clients for smoking cigarettes?" And so I believe it was like an Easter Day parade, something like that, in New York City or some large city, maybe it was Chicago. He hired a bunch of women to, at a certain time, at like when he gave the signal, they were all going to pull cigarettes out of their bags, and they were going to light up in this one particular area as a protest. And then he contacted a bunch of press and said, "Hey, this is going to be happening at this time at this place." And it went off without a hitch, and it was covered in newspapers, widely across the country. And that was the start. And it was, posed as this rebellion and female empowerment. And that was the start of women smoking in America. And so when I get back to narrative and things not quite being as they seem, it's interesting to think about that. And that was very successful. And that was not a one-off. It's not like they were like, "Gee, that worked great. let's never do that again.
Right.
So that was a long time ago. Things have obviously got more sophisticated. And so,
Hmm.
moving, and so where do you go? What do you do knowing that you have, that you're bombarded with so much of this information that, may or may not be true, may or may not have your best interest in mind, as an individual, and for your family and for the people you love. And maybe this comes back to you and some of the work you're doing. I think a lot of it comes back to self-empowerment, sovereignty, moving back into the body, um, back into the breath, back into some kind of primacy of experience, to get some clarity and to get some stills. And maybe that is where the invisible path starts.
Yeah. So I found it interesting. You brought up the word responsibility earlier, right? And responsibility is one of those. It's actually a word with some of this hidden invisible meaning to it, because we think of responsibility as like chores, right? We think of like, oh man, I don't want to have this responsibility. But if you're put in a place where you don't have the ability to respond, right? And responsibility is quite literally your ability to respond to something. Break apart that word. If you're in a place where you don't have the ability to take any action, if you're completely helpless within a situation, you are the least empowered you can possibly be. And responsibility has earned this negative connotation that's completely undeserved. And I've run down this concept of willingness to have some sacrifice, and willingness to take full responsibility of not only the things that you've done, but the things that happen around the universe, because you do have the ability to respond to every single thing that happens. And once you fulfill that role, the empowerment there is remarkable, and it brings you back to the true worth within your being and your place within this universe. No matter how infinitely small it may be, you have full control over you. 100% control over, not over you, that's wrong, over the way you respond to things, though, right? Like you have a choice to respond in any way you want, as long as you can create enough separation between the thing that's happening and the decision to react. Now, as I say that,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, there's a whole bunch of biological things that can happen at a deeper level within you that you're not even aware of, that you could never possibly know about, and that could happen to you. So there's just these layers of this onion that just keep pulling and pulling back. But I do think it does start with empowering yourself, and that idea of hiding something. The cigarette example that you brought up, right? It's like, okay, we're going to slip this message through the idea of empowerment to people, because there's nothing more powerful than the idea of empowering yourself or empowering someone. And if you can put a hidden message within that idea of empowerment, you can basically get anyone to take any poison pill you want them to serve you in any way you want. And that's why the invisible path, or the revealing of an invisible path, is so freaking important.
It's like we're told that we have freedom of choice, and then we're given two options, A or B. You can either
red pill or the blue pill.
Be in agreement, or you can be the loyal opposition. And I think that is such a trap, to be the loyal opposition. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, and that really is why this path is invisible, because it is not, you are not taking a side in a way. You're avoiding ideology and strongly held beliefs to some degree. It's like, it's also invisible because you're going to have to stumble through it on your own, one step at a time, and you're going to have to make the decisions for yourself for what needs fixing in your life, and where you're going to adopt that responsibility. I mean, so what's interesting about self-improvement and trying to make the world better, I suppose, as a consequence of that, is that there's a real vulnerability in that. It's an admission that there's something in your life you're not happy with, that something isn't working, that maybe you've made mistakes, or that you ignored things that seem so obvious to you now, like, oh, I was ignoring this thing for so long, and then a catastrophe showed up. And maybe it shows up in spite of you adopting responsibility. That's a brutal thing too. You may not be deserving of, whatever steaming pile ends up on your doorstep. Maybe it's not your fault at all. And so taking responsibility for that, it sounds unfair, and it also sounds kind of preposterous in some way, because I don't know. I can think of a lot of examples of terrible things that could show up in my life, and I doubt I would be able to confront them in a really awesome way at first, right? It takes a long time. There's definitely some, oh my gosh, some resistance there. And also, if you're adopting this responsibility, no one's going to notice at first, right? Because if you're real self-improvement is an incremental process, and it is not some giant, step function improvement in your life. Usually it's just brutal incremental work that no one notices for a long time. And so there won't be a ticker tape parade for you on the invisible path.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Those incremental gains, right? Incremental gains can happen so slowly that no one may notice ever, right? The interesting thing is, unless someone took a retrospective of your life, it's likely right now that no matter who you are, you've likely changed dramatically in 10 years. If you haven't changed dramatically in 10 years, shoot, you're doing it wrong. I don't believe we should ever be the same person that we were 10 years ago. But it's also very unlikely that if you ask people that have known you for 10 years, they'd be like, oh yeah, completely different person than they were 10 years ago. But the likelihood is you are significantly different than you were 10 years ago, because there are 10 more years of accumulated experiences rolling around in your brain and in your biology. So you just physically, mentally, whatever it is, you're a different being. But it happens slowly. It happens second by second. And I think that is interesting. Now, I do think there's this struggle within the traditional self-improvement world, which is that you can incrementally get yourself to infinity, right? So if your goal is infinite expansion and you're taking an incremental approach to that, you're unfortunately going to be unsuccessful inherently by the nature of the infinite experience, right? So there's something to a mass releasing of cognitive entanglement, I would say, like this ideology thing. We are without a doubt slaves to ideology. Some of us more impacted and more gripped and more tightly bound to that concept. But if we could just let that go, and if we could just admit in one breath, I don't know, right? If we could just get to the point where we said, I don't know about everything, that expansion would be infinite and remarkable. It's a hard thing to do.
So this is like, this seems to map onto like the notion of Satori, right? Some kind of flash of insight, flash of enlightenment, and actually finding the the workaround, finding that back door into a massive improvement. And I was ready for that and open to that when I was younger. Right now, as the years go by, I have a family. It's almost like I've been pushed down Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a way, and made to refocus on lower levels of that. I think that's something that's interesting that we could talk about later as well. But
that is fascinating.
Some people are not ready for, myself included. Like my 12-year-old, he'll show me these YouTube, videos about meditation for like opening up your pineal gland, and sometimes we'll do these meditations together, and I just think, my God, he's further ahead than I am, and I was further ahead in some senses years ago. Now, at the same time, you get wisdom as you age, and the price you pay for that wisdom is everything. Yeah, you have to grind up years and years, and trauma and joy and all sorts of things to attain that wisdom. And so incremental steps, I think that's something that some people, that's where they have to start. And where was I going with this? So what's interesting about this is that it's really easy. People feel secure in sticking with just the regular path. And you talked before about changing, what happens in 10 years, and have you changed or not? If you don't go through the uncomfortable exercise of thinking about what your life will be 10 years from now, if you really do nothing, versus 10 years from now, if you challenge yourself, if you go into those uncomfortable spaces, if you actually have a goal, my God, like just having a goal and then making incremental progress towards that goal can be really impactful. But understanding how to use pain and how to envision your future life and the future lives of those people around you, if you're doing things, if you're moving in the proper way towards some kind of ideal that you set for yourself, versus just moving along with whatever whims that society is kind of pushing you along in, you're going to have vastly different outcomes there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of this invisible path too, is having some awareness of the motivations of pain and pleasure. Thinking about just the simple frameworks of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or the chakra levels, or whatever. I think that's an interesting one as well. And going through some of that pain, like thinking about where things haven't worked out in the past and what you'd like to improve in the future. These are all the pains and the burdens of the initiate to the invisible path.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be willing to pursue some uncommon information. You have to be willing to push those boundaries out, and look for uncommon views and practices, and make some self-discoveries. It's an important thing. I think that, hearing a little bit about what you're doing with some of your classes is pretty mind-blowing in that regard. And just empowering yourself is going to give you a great deal of hope, I think. Trying some new things creates a lot of hope, and my God, everybody needs that. That's for sure.
So when you're saying that, I'm thinking of why this podcast actually has some value and importance to people. And when you talk about society, right? there is an undeniable fact that the society we live in is not designed to provide your individual being's ultimate fulfillment and happiness, right? Like it cannot possibly be designed to create ultimate fulfillment and happiness for every single being within a given society. So if you're following the flow of society, you are inherently setting yourself up to not reach your ultimate potential, right? Like there's no way that you could follow the flow of something that's not going to reach your full potential and end up at your full potential. So the question of like, okay, great, Joel, Patrick, I like doing what, like, why do I want to step outside of the norm? What's the reason for me to care about this invisible path when I can go about my life and I can live on a perfectly manicured street, and I have street lights, I have electricity, I have Netflix. What else do I need? And I think the reality is, if we're looking at that hierarchy, and I want to get into that hierarchy conversation for like 27 hours. So I'm just going to briefly touch on this, but if you're looking at that hierarchy, right, like you can check off a lot of those, of those needs, right? Like food, shelter, boom, boom, boom. We can work our way up, but there's a point where if you're following the flow of society, if you're following the path that's been laid out for you, you're not going to reach what the truest, deepest desires within you are capable of. And that, I think, is the reason to start looking into this. It's like, fine. A lot of my life is not my life. The royal we, right? A lot of our lives are easy, and they're easy not because of any other reason than we were born into a specific region, time, and experience that we had nothing to do with. We had no choice within. And we can just do that, and then we can die. Or we can be like, wow, like this road is already paved to this point. To this point of happiness, the road's already paved and easy. And then to expand beyond that, I have to kick off this road, and I have to push into some unpioneered space. And I have to search, and I have to trudge through the weeds, and I have to dig through the muck, but there's freaking gold in there, and getting into that gold is worth it. And gold is the wrong idea, right? Because gold immediately conjures up this idea of BS monetary, and there's nothing monetary about this at all. It's probably the opposite side of monetary. But I do think there's real value in recognizing where your divergence from the societal path starts to push into your ultimate experience in this life that we get to live.
Yeah. So gold is a great metaphor. It can't be tarnished. It doesn't change. There's something real durable about that. And that is sort of this ineffable thing, this spirit, this connection that we're looking for. So back to Edward Bernays for a second, to tie this all back. One of the notions back then, and I think this is actually in the 40s. This is World War II, or right after World War II, actually, because people like Freud had seen the catastrophe of World War I and World War II. And what they really saw there was, and what the psychologists were recognizing was an evilness in humanity, and uncontrolled destructive urges. And so part of the program here is that the society wants to transmute those urges. They want to shift those urges and refocus those urges onto consumption, onto distraction, because the fear there is that, well, humans are inherently not good. We have a lot of dark, violent recesses in us that must be channeled and controlled and distracted. And so that's where you get this consumer society. That being said, my gosh, it's done a lot of amazing things for us. This isn't really about, I don't think the invisible path has to do with rebelling against this stuff or trying to tear it down. It's trying to forge your own path for improvement.
Yeah.
And there was something else you had said. So this is, are you familiar with Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Quest, all of that? So he talks about King Arthur and the knights of the Round Table searching for the Holy Grail. And the way Joseph Campbell puts this is that King Arthur tells his knights on their quest to search for the Grail, right? To search for that gold, to search for that mystery, that they should all enter the forest at the point where it is darkest to them. And there's something to that, to go into both what interests you, but maybe also where you find some resistance as well. It's a very important thing, I think. And accepting where you're at, accepting your faults or weaknesses, and entering that darkest point of the forest to move forward along this path.
Finding those, I mean, if you're looking for a place to grow.
So I think there's like a lot of,
it's your dark spots. It's your weak spots, right? You want to, if you're looking for your place to grow, it is always your weak spots.
Always.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned this idea. It's not about like tearing things down. And I think that it's those two, that idea can easily be conflated, right? It's like, oh, well, if you're not going with society, then obviously you have to destroy society. And that I don't think is true at all. It's like, we're lucky to get to experience this. We're lucky to get to live and play within the society that we're born into. And as you said something earlier about the peak of civilization, right? We're living the peak of civilization. Mm-hmm. And it's true. And it's also been true for every other human being that's ever existed. But there could become a time when that's not true anymore. Like there may be a point when civilization peaks and declines. And that, I mean, appreciate the fact what we have right now.
Yes. So that's perfect. So another part of this invisible path is there is this narrative that so you're told and you're encouraged to live in surface time and to not think too deeply about it, to live in cultural time. And people, like ancient people, have sort of always recognized that there is a cyclical nature to time, that there are characteristics of different generations, and that actually there are these 4 generational archetypes that cycle over and over again. There's a book called The Fourth Turning that covers this. I think that's something else that we have to cover, because understanding where you are in the generational cycle is really important. And what I find fascinating is that the people that have the most awareness of this are actually the wealthiest people. The only podcasts I listen to where people have awareness of this are podcasts that are hosted by macroeconomists and people that, like, I'm the person who has the least amount of money that's listening to this podcast by a mile. And these are the people that actually understand history and understand what's happening on a much larger time scale. And of course, you can get into evolutionary biology in that time scale as well. I think we'll definitely cover that also. But to get back to the generational cycles, right now we are in the middle of the crisis phase. Every phase is a 20-year phase, and we are right in the juicy center of that. It started with the 2008 housing crisis, or the, whatever you want to call it, global financial crisis. And if you can't feel right now that we're in a crisis phase, wake the hell up, right? and another thing I want to mention with that is that you can get away with certain behaviors in different phases. If you were in the awakening phase, this is like the last one that we had was in the 60s, with the baby boomers coming up and having these realizations and coming into contact with psychedelics and all of that. It was real easy to move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs back then into self-actualization, and without really trying. And things were going really well in a lot of ways. But in this crisis phase, this is a real time to adopt responsibility. And that doesn't mean that things can't be fun. I think that they have to be fun. I think you have to move into a self-actualized mode and really express kind of the best of who you are, and get as far out as you want. If you want to take Patrick's magic secret passage into Satori or whatever, do that. But know that we're halfway into this crisis phase, and this is not a time necessarily to muck about and to be passive. This is really a time to focus on what matters to you. And if you don't know what that is, to formulate some goals. Those can be sort of mundane, lower level survival goals, or they can be much higher goals. But this is a time to really pay attention to that. And that's not something I hear people talk about. These generational cycles are super interesting. They also help you understand a bit more about who you are. Like, after I understood, I'm the tail end of Gen X, and after I read this book and understood these cycles, it made me a better parent. It made me a better son as well. It made me understand why it is that Gen X was so loathing in their youth, and why Nirvana was so popular, and why grunge music was so popular. This was not an accident. It's like we are captured in these larger cycles that we are unaware of. So we're captured by cultural cycles, but we're also captured by these larger, we're captured by intentional things like Edward Bernays and all of that manipulation. We're also captured by these generational cycles that hardly any of us have any awareness of at all.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating thing. And so digging into that in the future, I think that's really key as well. On this invisible path.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this idea of the fourth turning, these generational things. I started noticing this without understanding this in high school, and it's from fashion, because when you watch how fashion changes, right? Like, let's think here. So it was before the grunge stage, right? Before the grunge stage, there was this like ultra prep stage of fashion. Yeah. And everything was like neat and pristine and pressed. And you can see like I just thought, oh, it's weird that in this timeline of life, there was this like complete reversal of fashion. But then as I've aged, I've been like, oh, the grunge stage is back. Well, that means this clothing brand, this clothing brand, this clothing brand, and this clothing brand are going to be popular. And now I also know the next clothing brands that are going to be popular, because after the grunge phase becomes this like flared out phase. And then after that, we roll back into this phase. And it's so as you're reminding me of this fourth turning, I'm thinking back on those concepts where I was like, oh, you can just predict fashion trends, not by what's coming next, but by what happened before. And why that happens is because it's this push away from parents, right? It's like, oh, we've just flipped generations here. And I, like you, was right on that cusp of Generation X, right? So it's like, as those generations flip, as you get a different parent set, that's where the fashion starts to diverge, because it's like, I got to push away from what my parents thought was great. And now you get this whole rollover, and it's a remarkable thing. I don't know. Maybe we do that next month. Maybe we jump right into fourth turning next month. or maybe we push that down the road because there's like a billion other things to talk about. But there's so many things that can be identified within our life experiences by understanding how this seasonal component of time interacts with us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating to me how the millennials got such a bad rap for so long. They were the first generation. That was where the term helicopter parents was coined. This is parents, really paying attention to their kids, really being protective. Some people judge that as overprotective. And people just ragged on the millennials for a long time because they grew up with the internet their whole lives, and they were really good. They were the first generation, I think, to really be good at, hacking the internet, figuring out the shortcuts there, and really making it their own. And if you're a millennial, I got news for you. You're the hero generation. If memory serves right, you're the hero generation because you are the generation that is at their peak of power when it comes to the age that you are at, when you're living through the crisis phase. And so I think people that are older, if they understood that, they'd be like, oh God, the millennials are going to be in charge of like moving us through this crisis. But I listened to the music that the millennials created. It is so different from the music that Gen X gravitated towards, and that has to do with how they were raised. And every generation is raised with a different parenting style and has a different way of looking at the world and maybe what they're entitled to, what they feel empowered to, what knobs they feel empowered to turn. I mean, you look at politics, there's hardly anyone that's in politics at all. The people that are in power are boomers, and the millennials are coming online now. And so if you're Gen X, it's interesting. The people I connect with a lot of times online, they are millennials, and they're more positive. I feel like they're more empowered. They almost feel like they're more empowered and more entitled to go ahead and grab what they want and make the changes they want to improve things, or maybe to make them worse, either way. But Gen X has this. Gen X is like playing it low key and has like the vibrational energy of Kurt Cobain still within them, with a hair over their eyes, not making eye contact, and playing it safe and playing it quiet. And I think that's deeply embedded in there for a lot of people. And so, yeah, so the fourth turning is so fascinating. And then being able to understand and relate to your parents better, maybe how they raised you, having some context there. It's all within this book and this concept of the fourth turning. And then this next generation, raising the next silent generation, which follows the hero generation of the millennials, or the artist generation, I guess you could call them. It's just a fascinating thing. And to be able to see that means that you're playing like 4D or 5D chess or whatever instead of 2D, right? This is part of the invisible path, to understand all of these things that most people don't see. They don't understand how it's unconsciously influencing them and the culture and everyone around them. And when you start to unpack these things, that's when you can make better moves in the world. That's when you can take these steps on the invisible path in a more conscious and directed and effective way.
Yeah. Directed and impactful. I think, if you're going to make the decision to transverse through this life, right? Which it's a decision. Every single day you have a decision. You can stop living this life if you want to. It's remarkably easy. But if you're going to make the decision to continually experience this, it just seems like you should have an inherent desire to have a directional component, to have somewhere you're headed. And if you don't, it's likely that there does feel like there's something missing within you. And I think one of the things are a lot of my peer group, I think, is missing that idea of something. There's something within their life that just doesn't feel right and settled and fulfilled, and it may just be direction.
Well, you're never freaking told to have a goal.
Yeah.
You're never told that in school. No one ever says, hey, you should have a goal. They say, you should check these different classes off your list. And if you get an A in everything, but you have like a D in this one thing, then you're a steaming pile. You're just a useless person. Let's get you out of here. So this goes back to the normal school. This is like the foundation of education. This is like something that came out of the Industrial Revolution. This is something that will definitely, I think we have to touch on as well. Education is so interesting because of the sort of biases there, the unconscious, no, it is conscious really, the playbook there that you don't understand that's happening to you, but they're putting on you. They would like you to just be compliant and all of that. I don't want to get too far down that, but my God, especially I think for millennials, maybe it was easier for them to feel like, yeah, go out and change the world. But I think for God, yeah, this is really just showing like advice is autobiography. And this is just me revealing, nonsense about myself. Right. But like, you're never told to have a goal in some way in school. They say, well, maybe your goal should be, well, what college are you going to get into? And then what career and all this. But I mean, you're never really taught to think about that in a real intentional way. Yeah. I mean, if you had a class in high school and in college that was just like, okay, or even just 1 or 2 hours out of every semester where it's like, okay, think about what you actually want to do. Think about what you want to do with your life, what you want your relationships to be like, what you'd like to attain mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever, all that stuff. Just at least write it down and then revisit it later and think, well, did I make any progress, or did I just, the whole time on the phone with an Instagram, all that stuff. So yeah, bringing some conscious awareness to this is interesting. And you have to do that. You absolutely have to do that. That is part of, that's part of this path. What are we doing? Are we starting a mystery school here, Patrick? What is this we're doing?
I mean, if
I think you've already got one going.
But if mystery school what included a class where you sat down for an hour and a half every week and thought about your life, how much more impactful would that be than, hey, you're 18 now, make a bunch of choices that are going to dictate the future path of your existence. Go. Oh, by the way,
you're an idiot.
Yeah, you for sure are an idiot. Without a doubt. There's no choice about it. You're an idiot. You're 18 years old. Yeah. We're going to charge you $50,000 a year. You need to make the choices that are going to set up the rest of your life now. And you have 30 minutes here. Go ahead. Oh, there's a counselor. He or she will give you 4 minutes and then you're ready to go. So you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
And that's not like there's nothing to do with the like individual people within any of those roles, right? It's just that's the system that is set up, and it is beyond insanity to expect you. I got lucky, right? So when I went to college, I chose to get a degree in something I had zero interest in doing. And I chose to get that degree because it sounded fun and I didn't have to do math. And that's all I cared about.
Nice.
And, so I knew when I left college, I was leaving with a piece of paper, and that is the end of what I was leaving with. There was no expectations other than I have a piece of paper from the University of Colorado that says I could make movies.
There you go.
But within that experience, there was enough latitude because I didn't take classes that challenged me, Like I didn't have to spend all of my time working towards some goal that I didn't know was something I was interested in, because I wasn't interested in anything that was in front of me. So I took things that I was naturally good at. It allowed for lots of free time. Within that free time, I took every single class I could on evolutionary biology. And I would go to classes I wasn't enrolled in. I'd just go hang out and learn. And it expanded my life experience and my knowledge of the human intellect, human brain functionality, human biology in ways that impact my life every single day. And it was pure luck. And it was just because I could not add 2 + 2. Had I been able to add 2 + 2, I would have been down a completely different path. And I just lucked out. And I'm thankful for it every single day. And that was that really was the beginning of my like awareness of the invisible path, where I just all of a sudden was like, holy cow, there's this whole millions of years of history that are impacting the decisions my brain is making for me in this moment today. And you really don't have nearly as much control over that as you wish you had. Lizard brains.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think like you, I was very unintentional. It didn't have a lot of direction going through school, for sure. And I'm really a latecomer, I think, to the invisible path and to paying attention to all of this. I think I had to go through a decent amount of pain and frustration before I finally had this moment of just, saying that's enough. Let's just work on something else here. And just paying attention to what was going on. And it's work, like we sort of fell into it and we got lucky. Now it's harder and harder to do that, for sure. And really, I think college is a beautiful thing for the rite of passage and the experience that it provides, but all the education is out there for free now. You don't need to pay for any of it if you're self-directed. That being said, some people need the pain of paying money to motivate themselves to do things.
For sure.
So that's just real. But you don't have to.
We should set up a business. We should set up a business where you pay us and then you go watch lectures at harvard.edu.
There you go. People need pain. People need pain. Yeah. They just donate the money to charity. We'll just donate the money to charity. Just have that. Just have a paywall here. Donate some money to a charity.
Yeah.
And then you can go learn. Yeah.
No, it's true.
It's a motivator.
We did this. So we did this thing at Vitality where we would, when we started, we'd give you a free month. And essentially the return rate on the first class was below 5%. And then we said, okay, we'll charge you $15 for 2 weeks. And the return rate went to 90%. And it's insane. And it doesn't take a lot, right? Like $15 is not going to change anyone's life over the course of their lifetime. It may change their meal that day, but it's not going to change anyone's lifetime. But that little tiny commitment, that little tiny amount of pain, that pinprick was enough to have an 85% change in return rate after first visit. And that was a fascinating little bit of insight into human psychology there. And it's right down this world. It's right down this world because everything is available right now.
Yeah. And then being able to turn that around and do that to yourself, to motivate yourself in some way, that is the game, right?
Yeah.
Finding those ways to motivate yourself through some kind of, maybe through loss, right? Maybe through financial loss or just envisioning pain in the future, whatever the heck it is. That's part of this. That's part of this path for sure. Using all of these lessons.
Yeah. Lessons abound. All right. So we've had about an hour. What let's do this. Any last concepts and thoughts on
Hmm.
this very first little peek behind the scenes of what the invisible path is going to hold in the future?
I think we're going to cover a lot of different things. Some of it that may seem mundane, and some of it that is going to be more far out. I think, I don't know, we're going to have to think about what makes sense to start with a foundation for the initial revelations. I mean, that's what part of this is. I think like we touched a little bit on the generational stuff for the fourth turning, and really paying attention, and being present with what's happening in the world is pretty interesting. But then moving beyond that, moving into the body, and getting out of other people's narratives and the machine's narratives, and creating your own, and viewing your life essentially as a quest. And
Yes.
that is the move. But to do that, it's more than just saying, okay, it's a quest, right? So I'm hoping that we can give people the frameworks, those little nuggets that they need to help them take really effective action, and make things magical for themselves.
Yeah. That is exactly my thought. That was the exact thing. I feel like pioneering should be inherently exciting, right? It's like, number one, we don't get to do it anymore.
Hell yeah.
There's no more opportunity. There are very few opportunities to pioneer within the space. Like, it's very unlikely that you're going to find a piece of this planet that hasn't been visited by humans at some point in this world. So this opportunity.
There's only one place left, right?
Tell
it's
me.
right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. There's only one place left, right?
The human mind. Yeah. And it really is. Yeah. It should start to like kindle this little bit of excitement within you to have this opportunity to find new places within you. And I think one of the fun things about you and I having these conversations is we've both done a little bit of this off the beaten path exploration. And that means we've failed at a bunch of different things, right? It's like the thing about pioneering things is you freaking fail a lot. And like,
oh my God,
okay,
yeah.
So here's like, it just offers us a little bit of opportunity to share failures, so that there's some level of guardrail for people to push off on their own first few steps, and then just blast off into their own world and experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Just taking gasoline and pouring it on just hours, time, money, making the same obvious mistakes over and over. In some sense, it is a fascinating thing. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's help people out.
Heck yes.
I love it. It's so, this is interesting. Hopefully we can bring some humor and some levity to this. There's, people get so serious, and my God, life should be an adventure. And if there's some things that suck in life for you right now, which that happens to everyone, right? You've got to work through that, unless you decide not to, and not wake up the next day or whatever it is. If you want to stop playing, I guess you can. We should talk about that sometime too. I think that's a fascinating thing. But let's not end it there. It is all about this quest. It is all about, I think people will end up surprising themselves, right? Like if you were to set a goal what, what things were going to be like a year from now or 3 years from now. And then you actually diligently worked towards that goal, you're actually going to be surprised that you probably moved far past that point.
Yeah.
And that you could have imagined, because the world lines up, synchronicities happen, and the world does become a quest. It does become some kind of fascinating story in a way, where interesting characters come out of the woodwork to help you. Coincidences happen out of nowhere that you wouldn't have expected. Things tend to align in some pretty interesting ways.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, you're literally living a story.
Yeah.
And I think so, like, more than helping you, I think what we may end up doing is just kind of illuminating an idea within you, and like sparking an idea that pushes you or opens up a door, an opportunity to go find your own path. And because I know I have, like, I don't have any like, oh, here's the way to live your life, because that I don't have that. And I would never tell somebody, here's the way to live your life, because you can look at what I'm doing and it's a chaotic mess. But if I could spark an idea in you that allows you to make things better, more experiential, or tastier, like, man, I'm super happy that we got to have this conversation.
Yeah. I think what the goal is to help. The invisible path at its best is actually a stairway that takes you up so that you can see down into the maze of this life a little bit more. And so let's do that. Let's bring all our failures and all of our insights into this and see what we can do. And we've got an awesomely preposterous name. We can hoodwink people into thinking that we're gurus. We have to talk about gurus as well, for sure.
Oh yeah.
All of that stuff. And let's bring people along for the ride.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm so excited. Joel, happy freaking day, man.
Hey, man. Yeah, you too.
Love you, man. Talk to you soon.
This is a crack up, Patrick. I love it. Let's do it.